Next, I would like to introduce Clyde Calhoun, founder and CEO of Root Idea. Clyde, Root Idea is a consulting firm specializing in AI strategy and enterprise transformation. With 3 decades of leadership in Fortune 500 companies, he has driven innovation, R&D, operations, and continuous improvement across manufacturing, supply chain, HR, and professional services. An inventor and patent holder, Clyde has led global teams across 15-plus countries, delivering over $65 million in business value. He works directly with C-suite leaders to integrate AI, streamline operations, enhance workforce strategy, and drive competitive advantage. A recognized speaker and advisor, he is shaping the future of AI-driven business and innovation, and is something that is top of mind for me and my company, and I'm sure many of you in your company. So please come on up, Clyde. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay. Yeah, appreciate that warm introduction. It's indeed a pleasure to be here. The thing about it is that you have probably already guessed that I'm new to the world of wood, as V would describe, and this is in fact my first Pacific Logging Congress. But I'm here because a few months ago, someone from the industry reached out and asked me a question. They said, we're hearing all this buzz about AI and what it can do and how transformational this technology could be, but how do we separate what's real from what's simply hype? So I started digging in, talking with people, learning more about the industry, and what I see emerging is a very similar pattern to what I've seen as well in other industries, in manufacturing, in healthcare, in financial services. And that pattern is this: a lot of technology being pitched, a lot of pilots being run, but very little progress on what moves the business. And so we're going to talk about that today. This idea of how do we make progress? How do we get a big payback from this technology? And what does that mean? So let me start with this. There's a lot of money being spent on AI today, about $650 billion being spent by companies in 2025 alone, and that number is only expected to increase over the next 3 years. So a huge amount of money being poured into this technology. But I also know that some of you may be thinking, I've played with ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or Copilot 365. Yes, they're cool. Yes, they provide some value. Yes, they save me some time, but I don't necessarily see how that's going to transform what you're doing in this particular industry. And I would agree with you from the standpoint of, yes, it is cool. Yes, it is something that's interesting. Yes, it can save you time. But I would also say that those general types of large language model programs that are out there are just the tip of the iceberg of AI. And so as you think about it, think about this. I'm going to share a quick story to try to make this a little bit clearer. And it's actually a story about chess. So computer programs that play chess have been around for decades. And I grew up in the 80s playing computer chess. But they were always the same, this idea that these programs were being modeled to mimic human behavior, but really they were defaulting back to their programming. Every move that was being made is a reaction to the programming, led by human strategies that have been programmed in. And yes, the programs had gotten more advanced over the years, and you could see that all types of strategies from grandmasters were incorporated in the programming, and so chess programs got better and better and better, till they rivaled and even beat human grandmasters. And that was the way it was, up until 2017, when Google did something very different. Google developed an AI deep learning program called AlphaZero that learned in a completely different way. And the way that it worked was, rather than teaching it all the moves of grandmasters, they only taught it the basic rules of chess and let it figure everything out on its own. And so literally it played millions of games against itself, and in no time flat, it was not only able to beat all the human grandmasters, but it was also able to beat every other computer program that was out there. And as they started doing the analysis of why is that, why is it so successful, they learned something very, very interesting. And it was this. The AI program AlphaZero had actually identified new ways to play the game. It identified strategies or gambits that humans had not even considered. Now, we've been playing chess for a long time, for about 1,500 years, and in all that time of human focus on the game, we've not identified the patterns that were there. We've not put it all together to create new opportunities. And so that's the power that I want you to think about. This idea of what if you apply that type of analytical capability and reasoning to the challenges that you're looking at today, whether that's on harvest planning, or whether that's on recovery rates, or whether that's on inventory management, or whether that's on lead gen and lead qualification, or pricing, or logistics. So many different opportunities are out there of applying that type of technology. And so that's why $650 billion are being spent, not because of ChatGPT, but the deeper level of capabilities that are out there around AI. Now, that's the positive piece, that the opportunity is very right. But at the same time, the reality is that most organizations are struggling to realize that benefit. So only about 20% of organizations that have implemented AI are actually reporting that AI, the benefits are actually hitting their bottom line. And so that is the real challenge that is there. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is, how do you avoid being in that 80%? How do you get to be in the 20% of companies that are truly unlocking the value of AI? Now, let me take another step back and share a little bit about myself for context. As Pete was saying, that I spent a couple decades really working on driving enterprise strategy and large-scale business transformation. 2 years ago, I started our company, Root Idea, because I recognized some fundamental truths about AI. Number one, the technology is truly transformational. That much was very apparent. And then the second thing I also realized is that it is very difficult for a lot of organizations, particularly large organizations, to translate that transformation into meaningful business results. And so in the course of working with our company, we've had the opportunity to engage with dozens of organizations, including large global brands like TransUnion and Hershey and Owens Corning, to name a few of those. And we've had the opportunity to help those companies collectively realize over $65 million in profit improvement. Now, I don't share that information to impress. I simply share it to create the perspective that, I've been living inside this business challenge, and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And so my commitment to you is that when we wrap this session, you'll have a better understanding of why most AI investments fail, and why the answer isn't the next iteration of technology or the next pilot, is something far simpler, and dare I say, something a little bit more traditional. So let's talk about what's happening out there right now. So organizations are implementing the technology even in this industry. If you look at equipment manufacturers and embedding sensors with AI algorithms that really drive decision-making in real time. Or if you reflect on Keith's comments in the keynote this morning about computer visioning systems to help you identify log attributes and move forward. Computer vision is one of the subfields within AI. So those are real opportunities that are happening. From a logistics perspective, companies are employing AI algorithms for route optimization and optimizing transportation costs in that way. There are so many different things happening, but again, yet so many companies miss the mark. So many pilots don't end up scaling into real opportunities. And so I want to talk about why that is. And so there are effectively 3 traps you need to avoid as you think about implementing AI and being successful with it. And the first one really is this idea of chasing a bunch of pilots. Because when you think about the way that a lot of companies operate, they'll say, hey, let's try predictive maintenance, and let's try inventory management. And by the way, we'll blast this LLM out to all of our employees and let them figure out some other use cases that they can explore as well. A lot of activity, a lot of motion, but very little progress. That is trap number 1. Trap number 2, having your technology vendor or IT department run the show when it comes to AI. When you have like a technology team or you have an IT department in the driver's seat, what you typically end up with are a focus on platforms and dashboards as opposed to board feed or margin per load or recovery rates. That is the second trap that you have to avoid. And then the third trap is no clear strategy or the wrong strategy. And without a clear North Star for what you're doing, AI investment scatters, resources are diluted and momentum really dies. And so that's exactly why when you look at those three traps, why so many AI investments end up as scattered experiments instead of generating real outcomes. Now, let's think about this for a moment too, in terms of how you should shift your thinking. So I'm often asked by leaders when I talk with them, what's the best use case that we should focus on right now with respect to AI? Where should we start? And my answer is always this: that's the wrong question. Because when you begin with use cases, you end up with a laundry list of pilots and misaligned experiments rather than focusing on the things that are most important. And so the right question to really ask is, what's my biggest business challenge? Because if you start there, that's where the opportunity really lies. If your biggest challenge is equipment availability, start there. If this recovery rates are below industry standards, start there. If you've got safety issues in your organization, start there. Whatever your biggest challenge is, that's the place that you need to investigate. Because when AI is aligned to the things that matter most, you really get the benefit of the technology, and it starts becoming a tool to really advance the things that you're trying to accomplish. So that's one of the key things that I want to share with you on that front. So let's boil this down and really talk about the three things that you need to consider to be successful with AI. And so if you remember nothing else from this morning, I want you to remember these three moves, because they're truly the difference between AI that stalls and AI that scales. And so that really starts with this idea of anchoring AI to strategy. And it's with that mindset of focusing on your biggest problem. If AI is aligned with your business priorities, if it's what you care about day in and day out, and it's critical to achieve your aspirations as a company, then you're going to be successful with it. And I think the key thing to think about there is that the companies that fail are the ones that are trying to do 10 different things at once. The companies that are successful, they pick out the 1 to 3 things that are most important for them. They measure those things rigorously. They dedicate resources to them. They scale them, and then they move on. That is the key thing. And the other important point about that is, if you're making any type of AI investment, you need to ask yourself 3 key questions. Number 1, what specific business problem am I solving with it? Number 2, what metric will change? What metric will improve, and by how much? And number 3, the key question is, how will we know this is successful in the next 90 days? How do we know that we're on track? And if you can't answer those 3 questions, you're not ready to invest yet. So I just want to be clear about that, thinking about your business strategy and really focusing on that. The next thing I wanted to share, movement number 2, is really about transformation rather than automation. There's this idea that, when we think about AI, we're doing the work that we're doing faster or cheaper. And yes, there's some benefit in the productivity piece that comes along with that, but that's missing the lion's share of the gains when it comes to AI. You should think about embedding AI in your workflows, redesigning your processes so that they're more efficient, and then also changing the playbook for how your organization operates. When you think transformation, you get an entirely different result. And just to make this kind of an example, if you think about AI for harvest planning, for example, rather than just getting information faster, what if you're using AI, or your planners are using AI algorithms that really recommend the cut schedule based on weather and equipment availability and haul capacity and current market pricing, all in a very dynamic fashion? That's a very different thing than just getting information faster. Or if you think about from a maintenance perspective, rather than having your maintenance teams react faster to downtime, what if you use predictive analytics so that they anticipate which pieces of equipment are going to go down and when, and they're actually able then to incorporate that into the planned downtime schedule so that you're able to keep operating and your uptime is higher overall. That's not just doing what you're doing faster, that's changing the way that you operate, and that's really key in this situation. And then lastly, I just want to say this too. that you can't afford to sit on the sidelines. You've got to get in the game. And there's this tendency for leaders to think that because it's challenging to implement AI, because so many companies are struggling with it, maybe I can just sit this one out, let the dust settle, and see what happens when the technology is more mature. But the reality is that you can't afford to wait, because the risk isn't that the technology isn't going to work, because the technology is pretty robust at this point. The risk is that your competitors will implement it faster and more efficiently than you do. That is the real risk, that you cede ground on operating margin profitability, you cede ground on market share because you're slow to embrace this technology. You also run the risk, as you think about it, of the best talent being attracted to other organizations as opposed to yours. I mean, we're talking about what people really like. People like to be on board with the winner, and particularly young people are looking at technology as a driver for their decision making as they're thinking about what they're doing. So you really have to keep all that in mind. You can't wait it out. So with that said, let's think about what the future looks like. Just looking ahead for a moment, I do want to say this right off the bat here, that implementing AI is hard work. I mean, it will stretch and challenge your organization. There is a significant resource commitment, both financially and in terms of people to implement. And just to put that part into perspective, the average company right now is spending about 5% of revenue on AI implementation right now. That's the scale at which we're talking about. So it is not for the faint of heart. I just want to put that out there up front. But think about where you might be in the next 3 years if you do that work. Because when you consider having a new capability to operate your operation more efficiently, leaner, where you're winning more contracts because you're delivering more reliably, where your uptime is higher, where you're attracting the best talent in the industry because you have this new capability, that's an important thing. And speaking of capability, I do want to share one more piece about that. When you think about implementing AI, is more than just the technology itself, because it's not like AI is this monolithic solution that you drop in and you're done. It's more than that. There is a whole set of competencies that you need to think about, from policy and governance, so that the people in your organization understand how to use it responsibly. There's this dimension of change management, really aligning your people and your processes so that AI is adapted and not resisted, and plus the ability to change and pivot as new evolution, new iterations of the technology unfolds. That's part of that competency that you have to build in your organization. When you think about team training, just really getting your organization up to speed on the things that they need to do to use that technology effectively, that's another part of it. And then risk management as well. Understanding where and how AI can go wrong, and having the systems in place to be able to detect that and deal with it. Those are all competencies around organizational management or organizational change that you need to instill in your organization, separate from what you do on the technology side. So that's the thing that you need to think about in terms of implementation. So I just want to say this, the choice is really out there to choose the path that you're walking. And I know you may also be wondering, what does it really look like to go forward? And that may actually take a couple different forms. For some people, the next step might be a strategy day to really understand how you align your business priorities to the capabilities that are out there around AI. For other folks, it may be an executive accelerator where you're bringing your leadership team along and getting everybody on the same page about how to think about AI as a strategic competency and how to lead that through the organization. And still for others, you may already have some proof of concept work out there, some pilots running, and you may just need to do a proof of strategy sprint where you're pressure testing those things and understanding, what do you need to scale, what do you need to fix, or what do you need to kill. So in any case, the goal is really clarity, alignment, and measurable progress. So those are the things that you need to really dive into. And so then the last thing I would just share before I open it up to questions is that this is a pivotal moment when it comes to where we are in time with the capabilities that are coming on board. I think a lot back to the dot-com bubble and how transformative the internet was to the way that we're operating. Yeah, I can even go back further. I was talking with someone last night. I'm old enough to remember when a Microsoft Office first came on the scene, and all of a sudden we went from the transparencies on the overhead projector to now we're trying to figure out how to create these PowerPoints. Everything is changing now with AI, and I don't believe anybody's role will be untouched. Everyone will have some new things that they're doing with their respective role. But that being said, I do believe that this is a step forward that can propel businesses, particularly those that want to get out in front and really lead with it. So the choice is truly yours, and the opportunity is now to really take advantage of these capabilities. And so with that said, I'll open it up for questions. But I'd love to continue the conversation. So if you'd like to connect with me, you can catch me at our website at www.rootidea.ai. You can catch me on LinkedIn as well. And you can also scan the QR code there and give feedback on today's session, ask questions, reach out to connect, a lot of different ways to reach out. And of course, I'll be around after the session today as well and look forward to talking with you all.